Many years ago, I lived in the southern regions, at the crossroads, where the old road passed the path that headed north to the capital. In those days, the kingdom was prosperous, and trade would pass through these regions. I did not go for the trade, though my coffers were sufficiently filled from the endeavor. Rather, in those times, my grandmother, a kindly yet aging woman, was fading fast in her health, and my parents, desirous of someone to take care of her in her last days, sent me in their stead, as they had business in the capital with the emperor at that time. My grandmother was a shrewd woman. Many underestimated her, most likely due to the unfortunate circumstances of her birth. She had no hearing, you see, could not hear a sound, nary a squeak of a mouse, or the neighing of horses outside the trading camp, yet her skills at observation were unparalleled, unlike any other, even the shrewdest of conmen, and those who attempted to pilfer her or undercut her in a deal were sorely mistaken. And so it was that my grandmother had amassed a veritable fortune, partially why I had come there to take care of her, and the wealth that passed down to my father upon her death. The weather was good, but as those heady days came to an end, and summer passed into fall, my grandmother's health waned with them, and soon she lay at her deathbed, pillows under her, and a sickened bedsheet, the only comfort I could provide, the doctors having been cast out long before. And so it was, as I stooped over her bed frame, her wizened form looking up, she reached out a hand and grasped mine in hers. "I must tell you something," she told me, "a terrible thing which I could not defeat." Feeling a sense of filial obligation to my elder, I sat and acquiesced to her need, her last desire. And this is the tale she told me, which now I look back on with ominous portent. This is what she told me. When I was a young girl, I grew up in a village on the outskirts of the kingdom, in the mountainous regions that we call Vatror. In those times, traversing the paths was difficult, but even then, the winds of prosperity had blessed our village, and we saw much trade come through it, many caravans of traders passing over or through the mountains to reach our kingdom from afar, and our village, being one of the easier gateways into the realm, welcomed each in turn. My parents, like all the other adults of the village, were keen to welcome these traders. You can understand why. I understood from a young age, as I saw their pouches laden with gold shaken from the sides of mules and horses not equipped for the passes. These traders had it all, and my parents and the other families of the village made sure to take their share. These traders often moved on, and some never left. I do not mean to imply they stayed with our village, just that I never saw them go. This was not something I brought up to my parents as a worry. I thought it was natural. It was all I had ever known. My parents were certainly aware, but I do not think they ever deigned to justify it to me. I don't think they thought I noticed. And indeed, there was much that people did not think I noticed. I had been born unable to hear, a peculiar instrument of the gods. Some had been struck without sight in my village, others without hearing. It was common in all the villages of the kingdom at that time, when medicine was yet a feeble art, and the gods had not yet deigned to bless us with their knowledge. I was one of those few, and so from an early age I was discounted in favor of my other brothers and sisters deemed to have greater talents than I. But I was an observant lass, and though my hearing was not, I could still see and feel and smell, and those senses I honed to unimaginable precision. A person could speak to me, but I could tell through the twitches of their chin and jaw, through the blinks of their eyes, through the bead of sweat falling off their brow, the actual conversation that passed underneath. And, though I have never quite grasped the intricacies of audible speaking, I could understand what they were saying, and began to understand. I could see, peering out of my bedroom door late at night, as my parents plied merchants with wine and food. I could watch as those merchants would slump over, drunk in their stupor, as my parents would pilfer from their pouches gold, silver, and baubles. I think that is what drove my appreciation now for wealth, an understanding of how easy it is to lose it, and the skill one must have to obtain it in the first place. It's a cutthroat game, something that has brought thrill to my life even now. To be certain, my parents did find a thrill. I could see in their eyes dancing behind the firelight, the lust for gold. They would look at it hungrily, a hunger I could only see when my father came back late from a hard day's labor, and he desired only a drink of ale or a supper before he went off to bed. No, this hunger appeared in the eyes of my mother and my father alike, and in the other people of the village, and while they would send off the merchants, if they left, with great cheer, those smiles were fake and empty, and all I could see churning in their bellies, as visible as the blinding sun, their gold lust, striking high and true. Every month, near the end, when the moon reigned full, I would see my parents sneak out of the house, feel the floorboards creak under their feet. I would peer out my window, my tiny feet barely able to push me far enough, and see them walk up the path with their sacks of gold. I never understood the need for gold. I was never told the stories of why it was valuable. It was just a metal, and yet it held a strange power over my family and over my town. A power I have yet not seen in any other material, a power I have only seen briefly in the words of men who speak things I cannot hear, but I can see in the eyes of their listeners in excitement and a fervor. That is what drove my parents every month to walk out with their sacks of gold, their eyes dark from the night, yet aglow from within with their lust. The other parents were like that too, and my peers, my brothers and sisters, the other children, I could see them even as they shunned me, their sense of superiority, their feeling that they knew, that they had something that could be valued that I did not. I think I was free from whatever chained them, whatever drove them out every full moon. I would see them walking up the paths, walking into the trees, up the mountains, that silent procession not even lit by torchlight. And they would descend into the ravines. I had explored them often as a child, despite the risks. I was more observant. You do not need to hear to know when a wild bear draws close. When a herd of deer is approaching, you can feel the ground quake beneath you, a subtle thing. Most never notice it, but it is there, the earth warning you of that which approaches. It is dangerous, but you should not be afraid, because you can know it is coming. And now, in the darkest of nights, even with the full moon shining ahead, the town would disappear into the trees with the objects of their lust, and I knew not where they went, even though I tried to find it day after day as I was left to play. They would return empty-handed. their eyes dancing with excitement, even though the object of their desire had vanished. And as they returned, you would see in the distance, reflected off the mountain tops, burning over the trees, the hue of gold, glowing and perfect. Now, this happened as long as I could remember, and it was normal. But there came a year that was not normal, not at all. When I was but 8 years of age, there was an intense famine in the neighboring kingdoms. The harvests ran brown and dry, and that which did survive wept of rot. The rumors that the few traders who passed through brought spoke of ruin and terror. It is a terrible thing, they would say, that I would pick up. And this terrible thing they called dragon. My parents would listen and nod, their face the empty masks that they had learned so long ago to perfect. And yet, when the traders would drive away, they would leave, missing little, for they had nothing my parents wanted. The gold and the jewels that they so desired, they had not brought with them, for famine had taken it long before we could, and my parents would stare at each other with fear in their eyes. I did not understand this. Gold is not something to be afraid of, nor the lack of it. I knew it must have something to do with their monthly journeys into the wilderness, into the dark crags of the ravine. And so it was, as the days went by, and that time approached when they would travel into the trees, I resolved to find the root of my parents' fear. Their agitations had only grown, and it was only natural that I should come to find the cause of it. I left the night they would have gone. That night my parents did not go out. They had no gold to bring to wherever they would bring it, to their hoard laying in the trees, whatever cast the golden glow. Neither did the other parents. All I can remember was their bed springs quaking in fear, vibrating throughout the house. I traveled into the trees. The full moon ahead cast much light in my path, and I was afraid not of predator nor man. I had no reason to be. The forest had never harmed me before. I continued on my path, over vine, under root, and eventually I found those old tracks leading deep into the crags, deep into the dark, to a cave. I approached it and listened and waited to see what would happen. I knew something had to happen. I could see where the tracks ended, and yet nothing did. I waited for what felt like hours until eventually sleep took me. When I awoke, it was the next day, and I knew my parents would be afraid for me. They would think I was unsafe, and I resolved to return quickly to the town. But my journey was not quite so easy as I would imagine, and as I returned along that path, I knew something was wrong. The forest was still, and I mean completely still. Remember, grandson, how I told you of the vibrations of the forest, the footsteps that the bears or the deer would make? There is always a movement to the trees, a sense of life, that something is alive around you, that everything is normal. That movement was gone, and the forest was still, and the forest was dead. And that was a terrible thing. I looked around. I could see nothing, and I mean nothing. Neither bird nor bug, neither animal nor insect. Even the air itself smelled of nothing, like it had all been burned away, leaving naught but ash. I was afraid, and I ran. I tripped over a vine, and the sensation of pain as my knees scraped and drew blood brought me to my senses, and I proceeded with ever more caution. I returned to the village. There was no one out. They were all gone. The neighbors, Pa and Ma Morgan, always out tending the mills in the morning. The mill lay unused. The wind blade, still not catching any wind. There was no wind, even though I had not known a day in my life when the wind never blew. I looked in their house. Nothing. They'd evidently gotten dressed. I could see empty bowls of porridge on the table. Shoes. Well, a shoe by the door. The other was gone. And looking outside, I could see a footstep and another. And then nothing. I continued on into the village, fear gripping my heart evermore. The sky had not a cloud in it, and the sun was beating down. It was fall at that time, a chill air, and yet the sun felt hot and heavy upon me. There was no one in the center of the village either. It all vanished. Nothing stirred. And as I kneeled to the ground to try to feel for something, a shadow passed over me. It was not a cloud, my grandson, for I knew the shapes of those well, and as I said before, there was naught but a cloud in the sky. I looked up. There was nothing. Whatever had happened, whatever had come, was hunting me now. And I recalled what the traders had said. The thing that stole from the people, that left their bellies empty, their fields fallow. It was a terrible thing, and they called it dragon. I ran, made it to my family's home. There was nothing there, and I mean nothing. I could see where the house had been ripped from the foundation, leaving only the basement. Looking in, I could see those casks, long denied access to the sun, now drying and smoldering. I could see where walls had been ripped and torn away. I could see, trapped under a barrel, a hand, pale and untouched, my mother's hands. She kept them so clean, so perfectly pale. There was just a hand there, attached to nothing. I could smell it then, the nothingness that approached. The ground beneath me rippled slightly just once. I did not dare to turn around. I did not know what I would see. But I could feel its gaze upon me, its judgment. It had been denied, and so it took the only treasure we had left. I did not know what to do. Well, I knew one thing. I knew how to lie from my parents, how to speak with face ever sweet, how to tempt the lust of gold. And I knew what this thing wanted. I spoke to it. This place is fallow. The world around us is fallow. But any fruit, given proper time, can flourish into great plumes of gold. Do you understand what I offer you? When this fruit ripens, when this land I am of ripens? I do not know if my words swayed the thing. All I know is that I saw nothing, that I didn't dare turn around, because to do would be to take the one thing from it that it had. Its identity, its anonymity. And I did not know what this thing would do if I stole from it, as my parents had stolen from the traitors. Fatigue took me then, and I fell into deep, unending sleep. Grandson, I tell you this now, as you are one of my treasures, and I would seek to hide you. This place, this kingdom, is ripe of fruit, but there will come a time when the fields shall turn fallow, and the air shall grow still. It will be a terrible thing, and they shall call it dragon.